You got to do what the Spirit says do. I mean, that's just the thing. You actually have to. And what the Spirit told me to do last week was go to General Assembly. And I don't know if you attended General Assembly this year or if you even know what General Assembly is. So I should probably start there. General Assembly for our association is where our member congregations come together to conduct the business of the association, to share ideas about how to enliven and strengthen our congregations, and to mark our major milestones such as youth bridging to young adults and the death of ministers who served in our faith. General Assembly, or GA, allows us an opportunity to connect across geographical barriers and to learn how other UUs are living their faith and to sharpen our tools to help us better to live into our aspirational, espoused principles. Amen. Suffice to say, General Assembly is a pretty big deal. And this year at General Assembly, GA, it was no exception. This year at General Assembly, our delegates, the people that our congregations choose to represent each congregation, voted 93% in favor of adopting that statement of conscience on undoing systematic white supremacy that Miss Brenda read to you. That is huge. That's huge. When the vote was tallied, a graphic came across the screen. 93% yes, 6% no, and 1% abstain. Upon its passing, Gregory Carroll Boyd, the facilitator of the general session, a UU trustee at the time and a religious educator credentialed at the highest level, an aspirant for UU ministry, and a seminarian, a young adult, a person raised UU, and a Black man, stated, "We will be adopting this statement of conscience as a policy to advocate for our values in the world. As UUs, we oppose white supremacy and the harm it does in all forms. And we know when we raise our children, our Black and brown children, when we respect the wisdom of our Black and brown elders, we move closer to the concept of the beloved community of healing, hope, and justice that is big enough, wide enough, comfy enough to meet each and every one of our needs." It is important that I put into context the speaker of those words because not only did Gregory Boyd offer us information, in my opinion, he offered us a lesson, a caution, a hope, and a prayer all in one succinct statement. Let's unpack it together. The lesson. In the past and present, UUs have not always been on the right side of history when it comes to resisting the seduction of white supremacy. UUs often lay claim to our history of the Reverend James Reed. White UUs often lay claim to our history of the Reverend James Reed, just to be very clear what I'm talking about. The young white UU minister who left his family in Boston to join Dr. King in Selma and was murdered because of who he was and the stance that he took. White UUs are very proud to be the denomination of James Reed, yet they struggle to claim the racist history of Unitarian Universalism. But we can see it plain as day in the Montana Industrial School for Indians, founded by the American Unitarian Association, which would be today's UUA, or in Tulsa, where the co-founder of All Souls Tulsa was the person who incited the Tulsa race massacre through his newspaper, or with the Black empowerment controversy, or the white power controversy, as some people have been known to call it, which led to over 1,000 Black UUs leaving our faith. or in the Southern Regional Lead hiring controversy of 2017, in which the Commission on Institutional Change concluded the UUA harms religious professionals of color, citing colorblind issues, colorblind racism, and ignorance of racial bias in white supremacy culture and its hiring processes. The caution. It's clear we can be better. 93% of us want to live into our principles. We want to weave the web in which there are no gaps. We want to weave the web where we can bring a multitude of materials from our community of communities to weave, to crochet, to stitch, to overlay, knowing that no one way is better and that perfection was never the aim. Who will weave the web? Each of us, if we choose. Who will unravel the web? Each of us, if we choose. And so in lies the caution. The children are watching. They are watching and learning and evaluating whether this is a faith that they want to keep or discard. And not only the children. Our story is that we are a faith. We are the faith of the people that come to us after the exodus from a more oppressive religious environment. Yet, if we look with our discerning eyes, we can also say, and we can also see that we are a faith of exodus. Where are our youth and young adults going? Where are Black, Indigenous, and people of color going? Where are our disabled people going? Where are neurodiverse and divergent people going? This is the caution. Pause and think about what your bias may be that is causing the web to fray. I definitely have them. We all of us have them. And our job as weavers of this web is to do something about them once we know that we have them. You see, the action has to be more than just talking about it. As UUA President, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray reminds us, we don't have time for a casual faith. We have a movement. Now, I'm moving on. We have a movement of people in our faith who have a very active faith. A faith in which the way they believe in the way that things have been. A faith in a Unitarian Universalism that is racist and classist and misogynistic and ableist and ageist. A faith in an independent and individualistic Unitarian Universalism instead of an interdependent and collective Unitarian Universalism. That is what I caution you against. As humans, as UUs, none of us are an island. Each of our actions affect the others around us. Like it or not, we are interdependent. The hope. Mr. Boyd stated, when we respect the wisdom of our Black and brown elders, we move closer to the concept of the beloved community of healing, hope, and justice that is big enough, wide enough, comfy enough to meet each and every one of our needs. Mm, 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 mm. Yes. Let it just sink into every fiber of yourself. Imagine, if you can, that UUism. I would like that, wouldn't you? I would like to weave a web so wide, so spacious, that everyone feels there's enough space for them to be in their fullness. Enough space for them to live out their lives embraced by their living of their free faith. I want to be the weaver of a web that is so strong that when I fall and break covenant, which I will, it can catch me and not break me, but encourage me to rise again, to learn more, to apologize, to repair what I have done wrong. I want a faith where I can keep coming back again and again and bring my community with me. What a faith! That's the kind of faith I want. And Greg Boyd invites us to learn Frances Watkins Ellen Harper, a Black UU woman who loved reading and words so much that she became a poet and essayist, publishing her first book, Forest Leaves, by the age of 20 years old. In it, she addressed many of the ills that we experience right now in our times. When I think of how many years that humanity has spent hating and separating themselves based on identity, it just sickens me. And also, I do feel encouraged to use our 7 principles as the roadmap toward our shared liberation. It reminds me that our 6 sources already point us to an interdependent humanity. It reminds me that we can utilize our differences to enhance our lives while we're connected in community. You see, 25 years after Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was born, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. This allowed slavers to kidnap and transport Black people and enslave them in slave-owning states. And one day she read about a young free Black man who made a mistake and crossed the state line into Maryland. He was kidnapped and sold to Georgia. He escaped, but was captured again, and he died shortly after in Georgia. His death was the turning point for Frances. In a letter to a friend, she declared, "Upon that grave, I pledge myself to the anti-slavery cause." This one man's death, a person she didn't even know, was her tipping point to leave the safety of Ohio and go to Philadelphia to make a more risky and larger role in the anti-slavery cause. We often think that our outrage isn't enough to change anything. And that's right and wrong. Our outrage isn't enough. However, our outrage, coupled with action, can change the course of lives. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's outrage sent her to Philadelphia, in which her house became one of the most frequented stops on the Underground Railroad. Her outrage pushed her forward to speak up. Her determination, her education, and her passion for the cause of civil rights and women's rights made her one of the most sought after orators in her country. While speaking in 1886 about women's rights, she stated, "Justice is not fulfilled so long as a woman is unequal before the law. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul." See, This is just one example of a plethora of people we can learn from. Another glaring example is Gregory Carroll Boyd. Mr. Boyd's point is well received. Our UU history is anemic in telling the history of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color UUs, which means that we as an organism are suffering from the lack. And the prayer. And at the end, Mr. Boyd blessed us. He blessed us with a prayer. The prayer was his presence. His presence was and is a prayer and a promise, just as yours is, just as mine is. For as long as we keep showing up, as long as we are active participants in our faith, we are offering a prayer. For a prayer in its simplest form is a wish or a hope, and in its most devout and most spiritual form, a solemn expression of thanks and worship. We, UUs, are a prayerful people. We know how to show up. We know how to organize around what we deem important. What if we decided that Unitarian Universalism was important? What if we decided that weaving a strong, interdependent web was important? Now, all we have to do is weave in, weave out, knowing that together we are the weavers and we are the web.